Hi friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah, and on this channel we talk about ways to make your elementary music classroom more meaningful and joyful for you and your students. In today's video, we are talking about how to plan ahead for next year. This video is for any music teacher that is building their curriculum, whether they're a new teacher, whether they're the only teacher in their department, or if they have colleagues or a team to work with. It's for, it could be for new teachers, it could be for teachers who are in relatively new positions, or anybody sort of looking to revamp their curriculum, critique whether or not their pacing is good, if their scope and sequence needs a little bit of tweaking, those kind of things. I'm going to be referring to and using some templates during this video. I typically just tend to handwrite everything, but links to those templates are going to be available below in the description box. The idea of planning really energizes and motivates me, and maybe it does for you too. But it's the sitting down and actually starting that is the most overwhelming and difficult part. Where do you start, especially if you have a small team or if you're the only person on your team to sort of gather your ideas and put them onto paper? I think the guiding question that you want to ask yourself is very broad and maybe even obvious. What do you want your students to know? What do you want them to be able to do? This could be by the end of each grade level. It could be overall, do you have a mission statement or a vision for your either specials department or your music program? What is it that you want students to be able to do? A lot of these templates are good for brainstorming. So if you choose to download them and use them, you may want to print out a few different copies of the same one because they are meant for you to put your ideas down on paper, to brainstorm, to take notes, and finalize later. I'm going to go ahead and look at the grade level planning template first. On this template, I see there's a space for me to put what grade level I'm working with, and then there are a few different categories. So as you're planning and brainstorming, you may want to think about what knowledge and content do you want students to know in grade, whatever, let's say grade 3. What kind of performance skills do you think are necessary? How about activities? Things like dances or books or connections to art or physical education or another subject area. Are there particular standards that you want to look at? You may be a standards-based school, you may have a standard-based report card. That could be helpful in your grade level planning as well. Any other category that might include things that you could have put in activities, maybe those things like books or dances, or I want third graders to be able to use scarves or to be able to, XYZ, whatever. And then just other notes you might put like, oh, third grade is the year that we always do this particular performance, or third grade, yes, third grade is the year we do recorders, something like that. Backwards planning is a really good way to start brainstorming with these sheets. So let's say that you are like me, let's say your highest grade level is grade 4, and I'm thinking ahead for next year. Okay, I may want to actually start with grade 4. And think about what things in those categories I want them to be able to do or show. And remember, this is brainstorming. There's nothing written in stone yet. You're just putting ideas down on paper. But once I know what my 4th graders should be able to do or experience or learn or accomplish, then I can look backwards and say, okay, how do I prepare 3rd graders for 4th grade with what skills? You can be as specific or broad as you need to be. So you may really value dance in 3rd grade because you want students to be able to count in their heads and feel a steady beat and move to certain musical cues. That might be helpful for something they do in 4th grade. Maybe there's a huge folk dance night in 4th grade that you host or that your school does, and you want 3rd graders to be preparing for that. This is just one of probably several different activities you're going to put down for them to do in 3rd grade in preparation for 4th grade. Now let's say you're not starting from scratch and you have a curriculum or a scope and sequence already. You may be totally happy with the pacing of that. You may be happy with what skills are in which grade level, but this grade level planning sheet can also help you figure out if you critically think about whether or not you like the idea of something in that particular grade level. Maybe over the past 3 or 4 years, it just hasn't been working. So maybe you actually want to bump that down or up to a different grade level. Similarly, are you happy with the skill sequence? Does it make sense for students to learn about key signature before time signature? Does it make sense for students to learn what articulation is before dynamics? You might want to be that specific on this grade level planning sheet. You might want to be a little bit less specific and say, I want students in 2nd grade to begin using, learning, and understanding content-specific vocabulary like articulation, dynamics, tempo. If you've been in your position for a few years, this is also a good time for you to maybe reflect back either individually if you're on your own team or with your music or specials team on the things that have been successful or maybe less successful in the past. Could that have to do with where they're placed in the curriculum? Not necessarily the time of year, but where they follow other content areas or even what grade level they're in. On those same lines, looking at what you and your students have accomplished over the past few years, you might want to think about their proficiency levels like right now and how you can adjust things based on that. Are they retaining skills from year to year? Or do you have to keep teaching what a dotted half note is or what a repeat sign is? Are there ways for you to adjust your curriculum and move certain skills into different areas where they might make more sense, be more applicable, and have a little bit more meaning? For example, if I had a curriculum that said students are going to learn note names in 2nd grade, but didn't really apply them until we learned recorder in 4th grade, I might say, okay, well, it's nice that they're learning in 2nd grade, but what are they using that skill for? If nothing in 2nd grade or 3rd grade and nothing till 4th grade, why can't that skill be moved into 3rd grade where it's going to be more applicable the next year? Sometimes a general category sheet like that with categories for knowledge and content or activities or other whatever can be maybe not quite the right fit for the kind of planner that you are. So there's another kind of planning sheet that I really like to use called an I Can planning sheet. And this is where you have certain prompts or sentence starters that help you plan out what you want your students to be able to accomplish during that year rather than filling in things in different categories. So for example, on this I Can planning sheet, you have a few different STEM sentences that you're going to fill in with skills and things that you want students to be able to do in that grade level. Let's say we're working with 1st grade. In 1st grade, if you have a student who says, I can demonstrate, what musical skills in 1st grade would you like them to be able to demonstrate? How about, I can describe, I can hear, I can use these tools to be musical, I can show these musician behaviors, I can experience and learn about, I can play these instruments, I can show these musical skills. This lets you be a little bit more, maybe thinking outside of the box. It's just a different kind of planning sheet. So I might say, like in 1st grade, I want students to show musician behaviors like responding to a conductor or putting their arms by their side when they're getting ready to sing. We might talk about what it means to be a good audience member. That could all fall under the category of musician behaviors. And when you think about those I can statements, it might be difficult to put those onto the grade level planning sheet. Like, what does that fall into? Is it knowledge and content? I mean, I guess it's sort of performance skills, but framing it from a more student perspective, like saying I can, and then filling in that sentence with something they can demonstrate or show or learn or describe, is maybe a little more thinking on the student's level. Let's do another one. So I can use these tools to be musical. That could be something like computers. You may start using computers to help students make music or compose in 1st grade. You might use color-coded composition templates if you're having students do like xylophone compositions, for example. But the I Can planning sheet is great because it lets you think about the things you want your students to know and accomplish and guide, that's going to help guide your teaching in a way that is a little more from a student perspective. And sometimes if you are required to, or if you just do write your student goals on the board, I can statements, or today I will, you can apply what you've planned out for students from the sheet. You can those can be written directly on your board, or they can be put directly into your digital lesson plan or directly into your lesson plan if that's something you have to submit or if it's something you personally want to keep track of, rather than using the other planning sheet for a bunch of ideas and then having to rephrase those later into goal-oriented statements. So from those general sheets, the I Can planning statement or the just general planning sheet, you are then going to want to sort of funnel those down into what your year is going to look like. Either you can go broadly and go like semester or trimester by trimester. You can go month by month. You can chunk out your year into sets of a certain number of weeks, depending on personal preference or how frequently you see students. As we funnel downward, we're getting more into what looks like finalization. But remember, nothing is ever set in stone. What you're doing is creating a guide and a backbone for you to be more organized and goal-oriented as you move forward through the year with your teaching. As you do this funnel down into more discrete units of planning, this is where you're going to want to continue if you have been conferring with colleagues or a specials team. Especially if you have students that are going to be filtering into a new school next year with maybe a new music teacher, you want to be totally transparent about the things that need to be taught and practiced so that students going from, let's say, 4th grade into 5th grade with a brand new teacher, you want to make sure that they're prepared for that and that, you know, this teacher over here doesn't need to reteach or teach for the first time. If you're on your own, which was me for the first several years of my career, writing my own curriculum, figuring out what to do when, remember that done is better than perfect. If you have backbones of ideas, if you have keywords, if you have simple I can statements, that is fine. You can comb through those things as you are going through your year. It doesn't need to be so specific as in November, all of my 2nd graders will be able to identify fast, slow, and medium tempo songs, and just like that's so specific. And then if it doesn't end up happening, you feel guilty. You feel like maybe, you know, I did all that work for what? Sometimes done is better than perfect. Getting your ideas on paper, looking at things from a broad perspective can be a little less anxiety inducing and just more freeing for you to know that I have this framework to work within and I can keep experimenting and figuring out what works and what doesn't. Having no plan at all is also anxiety inducing. So you want to be brainstorming and planning, but it doesn't need to be super specific or perfect. As you go ahead and fill out your monthly planning worksheet or trimester planning or however you want to do it, unit planning, you might even call it that, you're going to want to look at those really broad ideas and decide, okay, what am I going to teach and when and why? How do you organize your content? Seasons and holidays are a really great way to start if you're an elementary music teacher. So for example, wintertime is a great time to do things like the Nutcracker. Or Vivaldi, you could start with the 4 seasons and you could start like with winter and then go through the seasons for the next several weeks, which will take you over winter break, but still that's a unifying element. You might look at different holidays through the year and think about, okay, what are some books, some dances, some folk songs that I can use to support the greater goals, the greater, bigger skills that I want my students to learn. If you want to be a little bit less reliant on holidays or seasons, you're going to want to go back to that idea of backwards planning. At the end of the year, what are my students working towards? By the end of the year, you may want them to have written like a few different pieces, a few different small compositions with xylophones, with recorders, with whatever. And how can you structure that so that by May or by June, they have a mini portfolio or they've done mini concerts for each other? What do students need to know by April, March, and so on to get them to the end of the year successfully? Maybe it's not a composition portfolio. Maybe it's something like every year the 2nd graders do a performance of some kind. Maybe it's some kind of project. Maybe there's a technology component. And years aren't necessarily built so that students are working towards one big thing. But if you look at, maybe you're breaking your year up into 3 or 4 big sections, like by trimester or semester, maybe there are just these big things you're working towards in each of those sections that you are backwards planning from. On this monthly planning sheet, you have different categories. On the side, you have knowledge and content, performance skills, activities, and other. And then there are 2 things you're going to fill in at the top: learning activities and topics, and then maybe the I can statements. And both of those have been really helpful for me to help focus on what I specifically want students to be able to do. So having this I can statement focuses the learning more from a student's perspective than from your teaching perspective. So instead of just having a big list of, well, students are going to learn the tambourine, students are going to read The Runaway Walk. Okay, and from that, the learning goal is what? Something else to consider as a music teacher is that you are continuously building on previous skills. So it's not like students in kindergarten learn about beat and then never do it again. They do it all the time. We're always doing things like steady beat. We're always learning about rhythm. We're learning and playing instruments. It just looks different from grade level to grade level. So as you're doing this monthly planning sheet, something else you can think about is what are some small ways I can build in consistent routines where we're practicing those cumulative, important foundational musicianship skills, which helps unify your classes and make things a little more continuous. I have an entire blog post about teaching rhythm in the lower elementary school grades. I will link that down below. It's got a bunch of free resources inside the post and different ideas you can do to make it fun and engaging and use it throughout the year. Lesson planning. Now, admittedly, I am not the kind of person, and I don't think I ever was, to have every single plan that I did on a full 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with all of those different categories filled in. Being so specific like that overwhelms me. And I think honestly, it's not realistic. You could have the best possible plan on paper that could go horribly in person. You also don't necessarily want to be bogged down by specific details like the first thing I will do is this, the second thing I will do is this. Day by day adjustments, even on like the best laid plans, are gonna have to happen. Being flexible and being okay with a little bit of ebb and flow in the order of your lessons, or even the specific things you accomplish in your lessons, is a skill that either you're gonna learn or you're just keeping on practicing, because that's just how it goes sometimes in school. If you've been observed, you might have had to submit a full page or maybe 2-page lesson plan detailing a whole bunch of different like things you were going to do and categories, and just it had to be very specific. And perhaps you did that observation and you realized I didn't do that, or I switched the order of this. That's exactly why I don't get into the nitty-gritty when I do my lesson planning. I still reflect and I learn things and I adjust things, but I personally don't need a full page to tell me what I'm going to be doing with my students, how I'm going to differentiate instruction, what the opening close, like I don't need a full piece of paper for that. So I use like rows and columns to tell me what I'm doing each class regarding how we're opening class, what the core of our lessons is, what activities we're doing, what their learning goals are, and then maybe how we close the activity or how we close the lesson, and then a little space for notes so that I know maybe in one second grade class I sort of fumbled the way I taught this, but it went much better the next time. So remember that, Sarah. Sometimes the planning lesson by lesson is going to happen more in your head than on paper. So I'm looking here at this lesson planning sheet, which has 4 rows for me to plan 4 different consecutive lessons. I might know that, every day for the opening for these next 3 or 4 classes, I'm going to do some kind of rhythm routine. That could be a simple opening routine that happens every single class over the next few classes that unifies them and hits that rhythm practice without focusing the entire content section on rhythm. Content might be, all right, we are learning, we're gonna start to learn a folk dance. And then for the next few classes, that's a great example for backwards planning too. By the 4th class, we are going to perform it, or we're gonna make a video of it, or we're gonna go show it to a younger class. Then I backwards plan what I want them to do each day beforehand. The specifics though of how I'm going to teach a folk dance on day 1, 2, 3, and then perform it on 4, a lot of the planning details are going to happen in my head. I'm going to think through and imagine what my students' behaviors might be, how I might explain this concept, what their reactions might be, or if I can anticipate some of their questions. How can I plan for that in advance? Not necessarily on paper, because that takes a lot of time. You may need to be flexible with it. How can I organize those thoughts more in my head than on paper? So your planning time each week might be more general on paper and a little more complicated and thoughtful in your head. As I'm planning, I like to print out enough lesson plans or sheets for the whole trimester. So that might be, 10, 11 classes. Print them out and pencil in some goals, like on this day, I want students to be starting this project or starting this big skill set. Or on this day, we should be finishing up this so we can get to that. You can also use little sticky notes. I buy sticky notes and cut them into the shapes that I need so I can reuse them, or I can make the most use of them and put them all over. And then I haven't written everything down, only to go back and say, okay, I I need to move this one day earlier, let me erase it. That's just really tedious. So sticky notes are a good idea too if you have certain goalposts you want to be at on week 3 or week 7 of the trimester. Putting them on sticky notes can help you be a little more flexible with your planning. I hope that introduction to planning ahead for next year was helpful. If you have any more questions or any need for clarification, or if you have any specific examples of how can I plan ahead for this, or here's my position for next year, what do I do? Feel free to email me, DM me on Instagram, or drop any questions you have in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, it would be great if you could give it a thumbs up or save it to a playlist or subscribe to my channel. That helps other teachers like you find my content and learn from it and implement the strategies in their own classrooms. Again, all the templates that I was referring to and showing you are linked below for you to print out and use as you plan ahead for next year. I've linked a few other resources below, some specific blog posts, also my Instagram social handles if you want to reach out there or follow me there as well. I also have an email list below if you want to join the A Different Musician community or the ADM community. I email once, occasionally twice a week with topics like this, ranging from things like classroom management, planning, specific ideas for your classroom. If you want to be a part of that community, the link is below. Happy planning and happy music making.